Hi, everybody, and welcome to Dr. Archer's Lectures. Today we're going to be talking about the law of supply. It's the cousin, kind of the partner of the law of demand. And we talked about the law of demand the last time we were together. You will remember that these are the two forces, the buyer's needs and the seller's needs, the demand and the supply, that kind of pull against each other, that create what Adam Smith called the invisible hand, this market mechanism that signals how best to allocate resources through price. It's the best way to get the most efficient use of resources, and it's the basis for the free market system. So, as you will recall, every transaction must include a buyer and a seller, and they have to come together and agree on a price, each of them acting in their own self-interest. As we learned in the last video, buyers want to buy at the lowest price possible. Today we're going to talk about the seller side of the transactions. What do sellers want? Sellers want to sell at the highest price possible. They want to sell at the highest price possible. And the higher the price goes, the more sellers are willing to offer for sale. And that's where you get the law of supply. The law of supply says simply that as price goes up, quantity supplied also goes up in a given time period, ceteris paribus. It looks a lot like the law of demand, doesn't it? It's structured in the same way. But this time, we're not talking about the buyer's needs, we're talking about the seller's needs. And the higher the price goes, as the price goes up, the more they're going to offer for sale. The quantity supplied is also going to go up. You will recall from our study of the law of demand, there are a couple of parts to this to be concerned with. First of all, this is quantity supplied that's going to go up. And it changes as a result of a change in price. Price changes, and that causes quantity supplied to change, never the other way around. So it's price always that's driving the bus. Price changes, and that causes quantity supplied to change. This is in a given period of time. If given enough time, people adjust, sellers adjust, buyers adjust, people adjust, and these effects are less obvious. But in a given time period, from this period to this period, as price goes up, quantity supplied also goes up. And the last piece of this is ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus means, that's that Latin phrase you'll remember, and it means simply all else equal. What it means is the only thing that we're going to allow to change under the law of supply is just the price. The price changes, and that causes the quantity supplied to change. We know from our own experience that there are other things that can change, and we'll talk about that later. But with the law of supply, we're holding all those other things steady. Nothing changes, just the price. And as the price goes up, it causes the quantity supplied to go up. So what do you suppose that supply curve would look like if as price goes up, quantity supplied will go up? Well, let's take a look at it and put it together. Remember when we looked at the demand, the law of demand, we had a demand schedule that was Helen's demand for lattes. Helen was the buyer, and she was buying lattes. This time, we're looking at the supply schedule. So I've put in here that she's buying her lattes at Starbucks. This has nothing to do with any kind of real numbers for Starbucks. I simply made this up. But if this were a supply schedule for Starbucks, we can see that if we're giving the lattes away, We're not going to make any lattes. There's no way to make a living at that, right? Giving away free lattes, nice thought, not exactly a great business proposition. But as the price starts to go up, at $1, we're willing to supply 3 lattes. At $2, we'll supply 6. At $3, we'll supply 9. Right on up to, at $6, we're going to sell 8. We're going to supply 18. As price goes up, quantity supplied also goes up. So again, I ask you, what do you think that supply curve is going to look like? Well, let me show you. The first point on our supply curve is right here at 0, 0. If the price is 0, then the quantity supplied is 0, and we're right down here in the left-hand corner of our graph. And by the way, I forgot to mention, and this is an important consideration, we have price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. This is always true, whether we're doing a demand curve or a supply curve. Price goes on the vertical, quantity goes on the horizontal. In this case, this point, price is 0 and quantity is 0. So it's right there in the corner. But what if the price goes up? What if the price goes to $1? Well, now we move. Let me get my cursor going here. Now we move up the price axis, the vertical axis, to $1, and then we go across to 3, and where quantity of 3 and price of $1 intersect, that's where our next point goes. So we go up to $1 and over to 3, and right there where they intersect, that's where we're going to put our point. Next point, at $2, the quantity supplied is 6. So we're going to go up to $2 on the price axis, the vertical axis, and then we're going to go over to 6 right here. And where those two intersects, where $2 intersects with quantity 6, that's where our point goes. So you see how this goes, right? So the next point, we go up to 3, over to 9. The next, The next point, we go up to 4, over to 12. The next point, we go up to $5, over to quantity 15. And finally, our final point, we go up the price axis to $6, and we go over to 18 quantity, and that's where our point goes. Collect those points, and you've got yourself a supply curve. It's the opposite of a demand curve, isn't it? It starts low at the left and slopes up to the right, whereas the demand curve started high on the left and sloped down to the right. This has to do with how price affects quantity. When we're on the supply side, the law of supply says as price goes up, quantity supplied also goes up. As price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. And so we start at 0, 0, 0 price, 0 quantity, and we keep moving up, 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 up until we reach a price of $6 and a quantity supplied of 18. Keep in mind also that just like on the demand curve, each one of these points represents a unique combination of price and quantity supplied. Each one is unique. And so whenever you change the price, we jump from $1 to $3. We also change the quantity. We jump from quantity of 3 to quantity of 9. And that's always the case. Each one of these points is a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. Quantity is in the driver's seat. Price is in the driver's seat. Price is in the driver's seat. Price changes, and that causes quantity to change. Price changes, and that causes quantity to change. And the only way that quantity can change, the only way that you can change quantity supplied is to change the price, because we're holding everything else steady, right? That's that ceteris paribus clause in that law of supply. Law of supply says as price goes up, quantity supplied goes up in a given time frame, ceteris paribus. Okay, so what happens if something other than price changes? Then you get a shift in supply, right? So at every single price point, the quantity supplied is different than it was before. It's not just one small move that we went from quantity supplied of 10 to 15 when we changed the price from 2 to 3. Oh, no, no, no. This is a question of something happened and caused the quantity supplied to be greater at every price point than it was previously. Maybe things like consumer expectations changed. Maybe they felt like they might have, well, not consumer expectations, but supplier expectations changed. Maybe they felt like that the business was going to go better. Maybe the price of their inputs changed. Maybe it was cheaper for them to produce the supply. A lot of things could have changed. But what you get here is a shift in supply, something other than price change, something other than price. And so you get a whole new supply curve where the quantity supplied is different at every price point. And so to review, when price changes, then you get a change in quantity supplied. And that is represented by movement up and down a single supply curve. Price changes, quantity supplied changes, one supply curve. If something other than price changes, then you get a shift in supply. You get a whole new supply curve where quantity supplied is different at every price point than it was before. Here are some of the things that could change with regard to supply and how they will affect things. The most important thing I want you to notice about this is that there's only one that can change the quantity supplied. Only a change in price can cause a change in quantity supplied. That's the only way quantity supplied can change. And that's movement along a single supply curve. If any of the rest of these change, well, that's a shift in supply. Let's look at these. So what if the input price is changed? Maybe the price of coffee goes down. That makes it cheaper for Starbucks to produce that latte. If it's cheaper for them to produce it and yet they're getting the same price that they were before, they're making more money, so they're going to produce more. That whole supply curve is going to shift to the right. What would happen if the price of coffee went up? That supply curve would shift left because now it's more expensive for them to produce a latte. How about technology? Some kind of technology happens and it allows Starbucks to produce a latte with robotic technology. The barista is not needed to produce a latte. So they can produce them quickly and they can produce them accurately and they can move people through just like this. That's going to cause them to produce more, isn't it? That's a shift in supply. What about if the number of sellers changed? We have been talking only about Starbucks as the supplier. But as we learned in our video about demand, market demand was the sum of all the individual demands. Likewise, market supply is the sum of all the individual supply produced by all the individual suppliers. And so if you get more suppliers, more sellers, you're obviously going to have a bigger total supply shift to the right. And finally, expectations. If Starbucks expects that when it's wintertime, they're going to sell more lattes, they might increase their supply for the winter months. Before we leave this slide, I want to emphasize once again, the only thing that can cause a change in quantity supplied is a change in price. If anything other than price changes, then you get a shift in supply. And that's all for today's lecture on the law of supply. I hope this has been helpful for you. Join us next time. We're going to bring together the law of demand and the law of supply, and we're going to talk about equilibrium. So I look forward to seeing you next time on Dr. Archer's Lectures.